Well, Rural Leaders was commissioned by Food and Fibre Centre of Vocational Excellence. This was back in September of 2022 to research and design a leadership development ecosystem for the sector. Now, the result is a path to realising leadership potential in Aotearoa, New Zealand's food and fibre sector. That is the result of this collaboration. And we're going to be talking to three of the authors of this report, Chris Parsons, Joan Ford, and Josh Williams. But first of all, let's welcome onto the show Rural Leaders Chief Executive Lisa Rogers. G'day, Lisa. How are you?
Very well today, thank you.
Nice to have you on the program. What was the brief you were given from Food and Fibre Cove, as they're known?
Yeah. So this came about in September 2022, when the Food and Fibre Cove wanted to support rural leaders into researching and writing around the idea of having even better and more impactful leaders for our sector. So we were aware that we were facing continuous change, both on a global and a national context, and to underline that, that really showed that we needed great leaders, high-performing leaders, in fact, for the people and teams that they were serving in order to navigate those continuous changes as they were coming. We then teamed up with the three authors that we've mentioned, so Chris Parsons, Joan Ford, and Josh Williams, and they have spent 18 months putting together this report, which is incredibly comprehensive.
Now, in terms of actually getting these people on board, their credentials are very high in the different sort of areas that they're looking at in this particular book. What was it about them that was appealing, attractive, etc.?
Well, at the time, Chris Parsons was the then CEO of Rural Leaders New Zealand, and this was something he was incredibly passionate about. Leadership is part of his DNA. So he was really keen on being able to be part of this in a practical sense, rather than just initially driving the project. Joan Ford is steeped in great experience within the leadership part of our sector, and she was able to bring together, along with Chris, a deep understanding of what effective leadership is, and they've put together a fantastic model around principles-centred leadership. And Josh Williams is hugely experienced within the Tertiary Education Commission framework, and he has brought his incredible experience together along with the two others to design an ecosystem for pathways for programs that people can actually be able to have accreditation and qualifications.
So we look forward to chatting with all of those individuals. Why is this important for the food and fibre sector, Lisa?
Because I think with the challenges that we are facing, the headwinds that we've got globally and nationally at the moment, in order to navigate those changes, our food and fibre sector businesses need to have incredibly self-aware, articulate and high-performing leaders. And so being able to see a pathway of bringing people through into the sector, being able to develop themselves and actually feel that there is longevity in their careers within the sector. This is what this report actually shows. Not only the potential impacts of having great leaders, but also the fact that it is a viable option and we want to have people coming through.
Well, let's delve into it then. Lisa Rogers from Rural Leaders, thank you very much for joining us to intro this podcast. Appreciate your time. And as I say, now sit back, relax and enjoy. We're joined now by Chris Parsons, Chief Commercial Officer from My Farm Investments. Great to have you on the show. Chris, how are you?
Good, thanks, Dom. And yourself?
Not bad at all, not bad. It's nice to catch up with you. Now tell me, what was your part of the report?
So between 2020 and 2023, I was the CEO at Rural Leaders. And as part of that, Paul Hollings out of Food and Fibre Cove, the Centre for Vocational Excellence, asked us to put together a proposal to look at leadership across the food and fibre sector and how we might improve that. And the reality is, we've got a wonderful sector. It does a lot of great things for New Zealand and New Zealand communities. We are fantastic, I think, at growing plants and animals. We have lots of systems and means of doing that, and in many respects, we're world class at it. But we're not so great at growing people. And as one person we spoke to said in a workshop, you wouldn't grow your hoggets this way. So to have a proper sort of ecosystem, I guess is the phrase we got to, that allowed us to have a more systemized, but yet still embracing approach to growing leadership is one of a potential multiplier for how we can double New Zealand exports, and also be good guardians of our communities and of our environment.
So, did you author some of this report? Did you?
We had a team of three authors: myself, Dr. Joan Nelson, who'd done her PhD in leadership, and Dr. Joan Ford, and Josh Williams, whom I think you'll speak to each of those two individuals shortly.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's get into the nitty gritty of it then. Why does good leadership actually matter?
It's the so leadership is about people, and maybe if I just started with the Māori term for leadership, which is rangatira, and so ranga comes from the word raranga, which means to weave, and tira is a group, and so at its heart, leadership is about weaving a group of people together, focusing them, allowing them to thrive, and then focusing them on an objective or mission purpose to get something done. So really, that's at the heart of it. Leaders of this, and when you're leading, you have the ability to, well, you bring people together, and then we can achieve more together than we can apart.
Okay, all right. Well, that's an interesting concept. What haven't we done in that regard over the years that would not live up to that ideal, I suppose you might call it?
Yes, probably the first thing to say is that we've had some outstanding leaders and examples of leadership throughout the history of New Zealand food and fibre. So um, the reason that we are where we are is testament to all of that foresight, all that hard work, all the working together of many people across the sector over hundreds of years. So you put that out first. And when you look at the sector, there's lots of examples of islands of excellence where different companies, different individuals are bringing teams together and they're making a difference in people's lives, creating export value for New Zealand, and moving us forward. So there's lots of that happening. On the other side of that coin, there's lots of examples of where we are overstressed. We have higher suicide rates than we should. We have higher workforce churn, and fundamentally, we're working hard, and that's causing, and that's good, and that sort of comes back to our pioneer spirit, and we sort of see ourselves as hard workers. But we need to also kind of work together and work a bit smarter as well.
It's an interesting point you raised there, the work ethic of, and you mentioned the pioneers. I think that's probably where it's sort of come from. There is a stoicism
Mm.
around that particular facet of the way we go about working in this country, particularly when it comes to the primary sector. I'm sure, you found plenty of examples of that in your research, Chris.
Yeah, we did. We pride ourselves on. I remember growing up in the far north, sheep and beef country, and the fact that life was hard, and that if someone lived on a tar seal road, they were a tar sealer. They were not as tough as us. And
Yeah.
um, That's good, right? But any strength taken too far becomes a weakness. And so there's another facet of our culture, and we touch on this in the book, is a collaborative spirit. And when you look across New Zealand's economy, you see we're well represented by cooperatives, as cooperative businesses, and no more so than in the food and fibre sector. And that's an example of our forebears getting together, working, bringing their resources together, having a purposeful meaning, whether that's returning value to the shareholders or returning value to the customers. And working together. And we've seen new examples of that, maybe not in a cooperative sense, but in terms of the catchment groups where we're working together to get environmental outcomes and building those strands of community and potentially economy together. So we're tough. We should stay being tough, but we should also work together and again going back to that word rangatira and rangatira mahi. The work of leaders is to bring people together.
Okay, so you've got on the one hand the toughness, and then on the other hand you've got the cooperative model that you've outlined there, and I don't know, they seem to, the way you're speaking about them seems to be that that's okay. It's worked for us reasonably well. So what aren't we doing well in that, given those parameters? Then
Yeah, I don't know. That's a hard question to answer. There's lots of things we are doing well. There's some things we could do differently, and I think the premise of this book is that we have post Rogernomics, when we privatised the food and fibre sector and the economy, we threw the we privatised our training. We just basically used the talent pool that we had and the good training models that we'd had in the past. We continue to use those, but we didn't continue to invest in them. A bit like a farm that has a good fertilizer history, but then things have got tough and so we haven't continued to fertilize the paddocks for a wee while, and that's okay. That can last for a while. But now, 40 years or so on from Rogernomics and this deregulation and sort of stripping out any of the anything that was inefficient in our system, and again, our productivity spiked post Rogernomics. So there was some good things, but we've been on a slow decline in relative terms since then. So the thing that I think we need to do is leaning on that toughness, on the collaborative spirit of our culture, and also our ability to think through systems and how we can grow plants and animals, is start to think about that in the context of how we grow people and building an ecosystem, so that we have a pipeline of leaders coming through, an abundance of leaders, if you like, that can take us through what is increasingly being called, or has been for some time now, being called a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment. That's to say that our world is changing and changing fast. And if we continue to try and optimize for an old world that's gone, we're not going to be in the game.
interesting. You have spoken to a lot of people in regards to this, from, I think, to quote, from farm cadets to CEOs, and from fishing boat captains to foresters. So a very wide range, obviously. What was the theme that came through from these interviews? Or were there any particular themes or threads that you could identify as being in common?
Yeah, we pulled out a number of, I guess they ended up becoming three principles, and Alan will talk to that, to them about how we as a sector wish to lead and wish to be led. But if you sort of boil it right down to, I think it's actually the common thing was these very human moments where leadership might have been a small act or a small piece of consideration, or a sort of a tap on the shoulder, said, "Hey, you've got the goods. Step up. I believe in you." Those really small moments, those human moments, were big in people's career and life trajectories.
Interesting. Okay, so yeah, that's a good point. Actually, it's those little things, I suppose,
Yeah,
when it
little
comes to
things are big
leadership
things.
that can,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. You wrote about mission leadership and delegation. What are those terms? Forgive me, I'm not embroiled in this world, Chris. You'll have to you'll have to fill me in on the jargon.
Yeah, mission leadership is it's kind of a simple concept. So the uh, idea is that we can come to you. You're a talented person. Or in fact, maybe it's encapsulated by I can't remember who said this quote, but it's a famous business person. Why would I hire smart people and then tell them what to do?
Yeah, it's a great quote. Whoever said that, they're bang on the money, right?
That's right. So what we do want to do though is we want to give people freedom within a framework. It's like not you're just not going to hire people and just say do whatever you like. They actually need to we're hiring them for a purpose, which is to either create social value or create business value, create community value, whatever that is. So we bring them into the team to achieve something. That's the utility of leadership, is to achieve something. And when we do that in a team, we can achieve more in a team than we can as an individual. So that's why you have leadership.
Hmm.
So we want to focus them. So mission leadership is simply around, well, what's the why? Let's kind of articulate that so people understand that, got that in their mind. And then what is the what that we really want to
Hmm.
achieve? What's the objective? Okay, got that. Then allow people the freedom to then figure out how they're going to achieve it. So they have autonomy to work out how they want to do it, and then there's a conversation to make sure that the resourcing's matched. We understand, kind of keep sort of the coherence of multiple teams often in terms of how people are doing different things. So in my farm, we have a concept of action teams. So we have a bunch of more projects than we've got time or people to do. So we've got little teams that have got a series of tasks. We all understand that the purpose is to help us transform New Zealand's food and fibre sector, recapitalise that, allow that transformation to occur. So here's these things that we're getting after in different action teams. People have got the autonomy, they belong to a team, and they've got the purpose to crack on, get those. They're part of the ship, sort of, advanced. If that's right, I'm mixing my metaphors here, but
Yeah. No, I get exactly what you're saying. So effectively, it's about setting a framework, but then giving the autonomy for people to be able to go and do that for the reasons that you actually hired them for. So
that's it.
I guess that also can come back to the fact that you've got to hire the right people.
You do, yeah. Yeah, and there's this interesting thing, and we touch on high performance in the book as well. And there's some interesting research out there around you can have a star performer that's all about them and maybe a little bit toxic, and they may be able to achieve good things, but over time, actually, your business is not going to thrive as well as if you've got a bunch of normal people like us working together brilliantly. That's what a high performance team is normal people working together brilliantly.
Yeah, yeah, and getting the most out of people, I suppose, and allowing them to flourish and actually, feel like they're contributing, I
Yeah,
suppose.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah. These things are they're fine in theory, though they're very difficult to achieve, aren't they? Like I don't know what the percentage breakdown of success or failure would be using what you've been talking about. That ideal model. But from okay, let's just say from my personal experience, they're few and far between.
yeah, yeah. It is. It's hard. As I'm an old soldier, and one of the things, I think it was Clausewitz, is a great sort of uh, general from olden times. He said, "All things in war are easy, but even easy things are hard," and it's a bit like that in leadership as well. In Northern England, they say there's is now as queer as folk. It's like it's people are it's not linear. People come to work in different states. They maybe have stuff going on in their private lives, or they doubt themselves, or there's this human dynamic which is always at play,
Mm.
and so it's much more an art than a science, I guess. So yeah, easy to put the theory out there, really hard to do in practice. I guess we just show up. We're vulnerable. There's power in that, in terms of being, hey, I'm human too. I've stuffed up. That creates a dynamic oftentimes where people can go, oh yeah, me too, and then we work together in a kind of a sort of a radical honesty. Actually, if we can get that going in a team dynamic, then you're not hiding failures. You're learning from them. You're accepting people for who they are, and then when people feel like they're seen, feel like they're safe, and then feel that they can be stretched and they can do something meaningful. So, safe, seen, and stretched. Then that's a quite a nice little way to just remember how to treat people and get a team dynamic going.
Yeah, well, it's a really good point. Again, it's an ideal. When employed properly, I could imagine it would be, entirely effective. Um, so then, with leaders themselves who basically set the benchmark here
Mm.
and implement the things, or at least facilitate the implementation of the things you're talking about, what makes a good leader in that regard? Can that stuff be taught? Are there just natural leaders out there who have those attributes and are able to foster and harness set example of, I guess, ideal team dynamic?
Yeah. So probably a couple of things here. So number one, leadership absolutely can be taught. I always think it's like an athlete. You have some certain attributes, like you can run fast, or you've got that ability to run. But then with coaching and practice and continual practice, then you might start winning races, and it's not dissimilar to that in terms of leadership. So we've all got the potential to lead, and in fact, the book makes a distinction between lead, leader, leadership. So leadership is actually three words in one: lead, leader, leadership.
Mm,
And so to lead, we can and should all lead. That's simply you've got an idea or a feeling or a example setting behavior that others find attractive, and then they start to adopt it. So you're leading in. And in a high performing team, every single person is leaning in, and they're contributing ideas, and we're bouncing off that, and then you get this dynamic, right? So everybody should lead and be a leader. You don't need a position or a title, or you don't need to come from the best, oldest family or from the best school. You don't need to be the loudest. Everybody can and should lead, and
okay.
that's sort of the nature of a high performing team. It's a team of leaders.
Yeah.
Leadership is slightly, well, we distinguish that slightly differently. So when you're in a leadership role, you have a position or authority, and that requires you're accountable for people's lives or their livelihoods,
Mm,
depending where you're. Sometimes both,
yeah.
and so not everybody's equipped for that, and often that takes some training, and that's why we have things like MBAs, and we have leadership programs and things like that. Because there's two things that are happening now. One, you've got to manage the organisation, so you've got to manage things and systems, but you've got to lead people, and you bring those two things together. And when you're in a leadership role, um, you can do this one of two ways. You can make it about you, and it can be about power, division, control, and see yourself up. That's toxic leadership. That's the dark side of leadership. Or you can make it about the purpose and the people, about the future, about being willing to step outside of your own culture, even, and those things that have always worked in the past. Is that still going to work tomorrow? How do we challenge that? And when that happens, you need to be able to. You're not only accountable, you need to be a little bit brave. And so those are the two things. And so when in the next section of the book we talk about the three principles, the second one of those is service and accountability, and that is there to guard against the dark side of leadership. And we can look around the world and probably even around New Zealand business, and see leaders that have taken that path where it's about them and about division and control, and that's toxic. So the way the research has come back is that people in the sector want their leaders to have a more of a service ethic, and if we're going to be able to deal with the change in the environments that we're facing, we need to take accountability as well.
Well, I'll tell you what, that's a sage bit of wisdom, I think, that we could probably end this particular section of the podcast on. Chris Parsons from My Farm, thanks so much for giving us some of your time and some of, I guess, a bit of an insight into what the report has got in it in terms of leadership in the food and fibre sector. So really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Cheers, mate.
So from why we lead now to how we lead, that's the next section of the report. And this addresses the qualities of effective leadership and opens the door to a new principles-centred leadership model and defines the elements that shape a great leader. Sounds like pretty heady stuff, but we're in good hands. Dr. Joan Ford joins us now. It's lovely to have you on the show. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks, Dom. Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, it's quite a meaty sentence, isn't it, when you think of it in those terms?
Yeah, it kind of does sound that way, but no, but I promise you, it's actually just really quite practical things that go into this principles-based approach. So
okay, so the principles-based approach for people going, what does that mean? Start us at the beginning. What are you talking about exactly?
yeah, sure. So it's not being principles based means it's not about saying, here are the exact rules that you must follow to be a leader, or this is the exact way that you must behave, or this is the type of person you need to be. It's not that. It's actually about being yourself. But here are some principles of leadership to help you on your journey to be improve your leadership capability and do the best work for your people.
What are the optimal principles then in that case?
So we've got, if I just say one step for a moment.
Sure.
So there's kind of the elements of this is that the first one is the context of the kind of the environment, the context of the sector.
Mm-hmm.
The second bit, or the second element, I should say, are the principles, which I'll outline in a second. And then the third element is called the dimensions.
Okay.
Now, we like doing things in threes. That's how we remember things.
Absolutely. It's patterns, right? Threes are patterns. Yeah.
Exactly. So we've got the three elements. We've got the context of the food and fibre sector. We've got the principles, and then we've got the dimensions.
Okay.
So would it be useful if I now explain the principles?
Very useful, I think, Alan. Very useful. Yes. Enlighten us all, please.
Awesome. So, it's in threes. So there's sort of the three principles to leadership. And the first one is it's all about understanding people. So leadership it's about people. So one of the principles of leadership is we need to understand people. Now, within that, understanding people includes actually knowing ourselves. That's the first person we actually need to understand is who we are, what makes us tick, kind of what are our drivers, what's our personality type, what's our sort of responses to different emotional situations. And so that's, principle one, understand people. You've got to know yourself. Surprisingly enough, you've got to know other people. And so you know yourself, you get to know other people, and then you kind of you build a bridge between the two. So how do I know me and then know you, Dom, and then connect with you?
Sure.
So that's principle one, is the understanding people.
Mm-hmm.
The second principle in this book, and again, this is very much driven by the sector, which is cool. This isn't just the world according to Ellen.
Yeah.
This is, and Chris and Josh. This is, what the sector has said. The second principle of leadership is service and accountability.
Mm-hmm.
So what that bit basically means is that leadership, the service bit, is that it's not about being important. So it's not about the leader's this big important person who rules the world. No, actually it's about serving. You serve the people, you serve the organisation, you serve the sector, you serve something bigger than yourself.
Okay.
And the accountability bit to that is kind of like the buck stops with you. So if you are in a formal leadership position, it does come with some accountability responsibility. So that's that principle of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
So number one, understand people.
Yep.
Number 2, service and accountability.
Right.
And then the third principle of leadership is you've got to build teams. So if you're going to be effective as a leader, you've got to build teams. And there are 3 sub-bits to that, because again, we love threes.
Loving the threes. Yeah.
And in order to build a team and get the best out of our people, we need to build an environment where our team can thrive. And there's 3 things people need. They need a sense of belonging, they need to have autonomy, and they need to have purpose. So very briefly, belonging is about being able to show up as your whole, full, authentic self. Because when you feel that, you can really do your best work. We need autonomy. We don't like to be micromanaged. We like to have some flexibility over how and, if possible, when and where we do our tasks. And we need to have purpose. We need to know that what we do matters. So hopefully that sort of explains it. So yeah, the 3 principles of leadership. We're going to understand people. It's about service and accountability. And we've got to build teams through belonging, autonomy, and purpose.
Okay, right. Well, that all makes perfect sense. I'm glad you have outlined it in the way that you have, because it's very understandable and relatable. I think, you wouldn't have too much problem in terms of, trying to get your head around that sort of stuff. So then, I mean, if we take a step back and go, how did you become involved in this in terms of the agriculture sector, or the primary sector? How did you translate your work into what they're doing here?
Yeah, sure. So my background's actually in the military. So I did 10 years leading soldiers in the army, both in New Zealand and around the world. And I then, following that, did my MBA and PhD, both focused on leadership. So I am really passionate about leading people. I'm so excited. I get excitable about lots of things. Sorry, Dom, but
that's good.
People just excite me. I love understanding people. I love understanding what we can do to make people feel great, because I know when people feel great, they do their best work. So that's kind of my passion, leading in the military, led in the corporate sector, and then did all this research on leadership, and then getting involved in this particular project with the food and fibre sector. So I don't want to pretend that I have a farming background. I don't. But basically, one of the other 2 co-authors, Chris Parsons, he and I actually connected through a kind of very random. It was a volunteer task evacuating people from Afghanistan.
Wow.
So we did that 3 years ago. We were part of a volunteer team supported by a whole lot of other people, and we evacuated 563 people from Afghanistan to New Zealand just on 2 years ago, after the fall of Kabul to the Taliban.
Wow. Okay.
That's a random backstory.
Yeah.
But that's actually how I met Chris, who was at the time CEO of Rural Leaders, who were running this project.
Yeah.
And he was looking for a co-author and a co-researcher. And him and it was actually the chair of his board, Kate, who sort of formalized it all. But basically, yeah, it was like, well, I've got some expertise in this area. I'd done a bunch of consulting work for the Army, helping them with their leadership journey. And so, yeah, I was very fortunate to be chosen as a good teammate for this particular project, and I'm very excited to be part of it.
What an interesting way to get here, right? In terms of being involved with this, because I'm sure I've spoken to somebody about that effort as well. I can't remember who it was, but that story that you've just told about the efforts to evacuate those people from Kabul, I'm certain I've spoken to someone about that before. Hellishly interesting story. And yeah, what a remarkable thing to be a part of. Right. So with that aside, moving it back to the food and fibre sector, what was your understanding in terms of these, leadership principles that you've outlined? How do they pertain? What state was the food and fibre sector in, or is it in at the moment? As far as you understand, have you been given any intel or background as to where the sector is at the moment?
Yeah, so that was, I guess that was really the Rural Leaders team and the Food and Fibre Cove, Centre of Vocational Excellence, that had kind of done that background. Basically, it was, and our first report actually, prior to this kind of the second book, was actually looking at exactly what is the state of leadership in the sector. And so we basically interviewed leaders across the sector to find out, well, what is the state? And there are pockets of excellence. So I think it's always really important to say there are some organisations doing amazing things in terms of building leadership capability. There are incredible leaders in the sector. So this is certainly not a criticising or kind of a ragging session, but there also it became really apparent that there is a gap. So there is not a consistent approach to training leadership in the sector. And I've learned a lot actually about the sector specifically during this journey. But what I would say is people are people. So my leadership work is across a whole lot of different sectors. And yeah, each sector has its own nuances, but actually it's fundamentally about people. And it's almost like the food and fibre sector has amazing systems in place to grow food, to grow fibre, or to grow animals and to grow plants, but we don't actually have the same systems to grow our people. And so that was, what was the state of it is that there is some room, a lot of room, to get more strategic about how we grow our people in the sector, because that's, I really see, and I know that Chris and Josh, I'm sure, will say something similar, is that, kind of the key to unlocking the sector doing the best work for our country is actually to, unlock the leadership potential, because great leaders help grow great people who therefore help grow the great food and animals.
Yeah, so what you're effectively saying is it doesn't really matter what industry you're talking about, is there are fundamentals when it comes to leadership, and there are no probably wholly good or wholly bad examples. Everything kind of, as you say, there's probably examples of people doing all those things well, examples of people not doing those things well, and probably a large majority of people who would if they could. Maybe they're getting some of it right, some of it wrong, but they probably just don't have the tools or the knowledge, the likes of which you've just outlined, as to how to actually implement those, because what you don't know, you can't implement, I suppose.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what I think is really cool about the book is, so yes, I am saying that, people are people, and a lot of these things apply beyond the sector. But what's cool is the research that we did was on the sector. And so the book, it literally has practical examples from the sector, so they're all really relatable to people in the sector, of where they have applied the principles well.
Right.
There's examples where people have been generous enough to share when they haven't. And so there's nothing like a story or an example to help understand a principle. So I've just said, yes, we need to understand people. It's about service and accountability, and we need to build teams through belonging, autonomy, and purpose. But how do you do that? Well, that's what the book's got, is lots of examples from the sector of how you practically implement it. So I think that's kind of cool.
Okay, so let's look at a couple of specifics then, or I guess more broadly, potentially what you thought from having a look at the sector and delving into it and doing the research and being involved in that part of it. What does the food and fibre sector do well in terms of leadership, and what doesn't it do well in terms of leadership, potentially drawing on some examples that you gleaned from that research?
Yeah, sure. And sorry, I've just triggered that I must mention the dimensions as well. So I'll make sure I come back to that.
Sure.
But yeah, so I think the sector, one of the things, I said there were the three elements.
Yes.
So there's the context of the sector, there's the principles, and then there's the dimensions, which I'll talk about in a moment.
Yep.
But the context of the sector is people in the sector, we're really, I say we because I feel like I'm part of it now. It's not just people that are get their hands on the soil. Actually, the sector's made up of people doing all kinds of roles.
Oh, it's huge. It's huge. Jump on board. You're more than welcome. It's great. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like I'm part of this now, and we're really practically orientated. So we're a sector that's has obviously every individual has different preferences, but kind of as a whole, we're really practically orientated, really grounded. And that's, in terms of grounded to nature. Obviously, it's a sector that has a big relationship with the environment. We're really kind of community minded, often because people in the food and fibre sector, especially those who are working, say, on farm or on boats, are quite geographically dislocated. And so one of the ways that we kind of get by is that we're really community minded. So farmers, foresters, fishers, and I know that I got the wrong term on fishers just then. I do apologise. I just don't like saying.
I think that's right. I'm pretty sure that's right. Yeah.
I think you're right, actually, because fishermen I don't think the equivalent is fisherwoman.
No, there are fishers, yes. So, yes,
Yeah.
You're right. Carry on.
Okay, great.
Established. Yeah.
Is really we connect with other people in the community. So we help each other out, and that's sort of a big part of our context. So what are some of the things that our sector does well? It's that. So we do have this real sense of community, perhaps more so than some other sectors do. You said, what's some of the areas for improvement?
Yeah.
It's really, we're really great at technical skills. So again, that's the great at growing animals and growing plants. So great at the technical side, but not always great at investing in our people. It's often more of a bit of an ad hoc approach, that there are some people that just happen to turn out to be great leaders because they happen to have a great leader, but it can be a bit hit and miss. Some of our leaders in our sector, because we're quite practically minded or practically orientated, we're not always as great at the empathy. There are exceptions, so I don't want to be unfair there, but sometimes that kind of building empathy or having maybe a more relationship-focused approach is one of the areas that we can probably work on in our sector. That was sort of what came out of the research as well.
Interesting, yeah. And I don't think there'd be too many people that would disagree with that. There might be some who would say, yeah, but whatever, it's a tough job, it's a tough life, it's hard, Jackie, you get on with it. If you can't cut it, then, can't handle the heat, get out of the kitchen, Alan. Now, coming from someone like you with a military background, though, I think if people hear that and, I don't know, for some reason, it holds weight. I don't know why, but I guess the discipline aspect, the fact that, you go to dangerous places and do risky things and are willing to do that sort of thing. I don't know, that carries some sort of gravitas, I suppose, to the message. Not that the message would be different, I suppose, if you weren't from that background, but I don't know. I think that would resonate. I'm sure you've experienced that in terms of delivering your message. A military background certainly won't be a hindrance to you.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that. So I'm not just some, lovely lady who's talking about being nice to people. I've served in Afghanistan. I've led soldiers on operations, and I know for sure that the best leaders are the ones who care about their people. It's not this, happy clappy. If you can't handle it, get out of the frying pan, get out of the kitchen. Actually, this stuff is important. We used to talk about it as kind of our hard skills and our soft skills.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like the phrase soft skills because it implies that it's lesser or weaker. Actually, it's really human skills. And if you're doing a tough job, like leading soldiers in the military, or like leading in a farming or forestry environment where it is quite tough, we are affected by the environment, the elements can be difficult. There are lots of practically challenging things about the role. That actually makes it even more important. Like, if you're going to be asking people to do stuff that's not always physically that comfortable, you've actually got to treat them well, because that's going to make them want to be there. And, as you said, if you can't handle the heat, get out of the kitchen. But our workforce is changing. So people who are kind of that mindset, that's not the future workers. So, our younger people coming in, they're amazing. Like, it's very easy to say, the youth of today don't work hard like they used to. I mean, that's great. That's a fun rhetoric, whatever. But actually, I just think, the youth of today, they're so purpose-driven. Like, it's amazing. They really are purpose-driven. And that's one of the things of building a team, purpose, belonging, autonomy, purpose. And we don't want to work harder. We want to work smarter. And so you've got these really enthusiastic people coming in who want to do work a bit differently, and they want to be cared for. And when we show them that, when we, literally create that, build teams, the third principle, give them a sense of belonging, autonomy, and purpose, my goodness me, they do the best work. And so, that old adage of you can't handle the heat, get out of the fire. I'm like, oh, you're not going to be able to attract people to your organisation if that's how you roll.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and very well explained as well. Did you cover it? You wrote down something a few minutes ago that you said you were going to come back to.
Yes, thank you for triggering that one for me. So we were saying that this part 2 of the book or the report is there was the elements. So there was the context of our sector, principles, understand people, service and accountability, build teams through belonging, autonomy, and purpose. The third one was the dimensions.
Yeah.
And so what we're talking about here is leaders who do their best work are leaders who basically align all the dimensions of themselves. So bear with me, this might sound slightly ethereal to start with, but basically we've got our physical dimension. So we think about like we lead with physical stuff, kind of transactional. Our next sort of layer in is psychological. So that's kind of the head and the heart.
Mm-hmm.
So the way Chris often talks about it is in the mechanical age, we lead just at the physical level, the kind of transactional. Then we got into sort of the knowledge age where actually the psychological dimension was important. We had to motivate people with head and heart as well, not just with the transactional physical stuff. But then we actually go one layer in, which is the spiritual dimension. Now, spiritual, just to, because I don't want to put anyone off here, spiritual doesn't have to mean about religion, or if it is religion, it's not even a specific, I was going to say brand, that's not the right word, but it's not, it's actually just kind of going deeper. And some of the other phrases that people can use that aren't necessarily spiritual in terms of religion is things like the sixth sense,
yep,
or that kind of inner sense of knowing. We get a gut feeling. There is all of us, even if we sort of think, oh, that's not really for me, we actually all have this kind of deeper something inside us that we kind of just know some things, and how we should listen to that more.
Instinct?
Thank you, yes.
You know.
Yes. Actually, yeah, thank you. I think we wrote that one in there. I hope so. We're trying to chuck out words that might resonate, and I'm sure instinct was one of them.
Yeah.
And so basically, if we've got these 3 dimensions, our outer layer being our physical, the next layer in psychological, our heart and our head, and then one level, and again, is that spiritual or the instinct bit. When we lead in alignment with all 3 of those things, that is when we can do our best job as a leader. And I think, can I just explain it with an example?
Please do.
Try and help, because I know this is not as practically easy to get your head around. But you know how sometimes you go into a room or a workplace and just something's off. You can't quite pick it. You're like, physically, everything looks fine. You're like at the psychological thing. Yeah, no, everything is logical. It makes sense. But there's just something about this that's off.
Totally.
And we all kind of know this. And on the flip side, sometimes we'll walk into a room, and I certainly do this in my work, when you're like, wow, it's just buzzing. The energy in that room, you can just feel it. Like, you can just feel like, wow, these people give a shit about each other.
Good,
like, they really,
good vibes. Yeah.
Yeah. And so if we can try and lead in a way where all 3 of our dimensions are in alignment, and actually if we can live life where all 3 are in alignment, that's when we can do our best work. And so that was sort of the third element of this model.
Well, that is really brilliant stuff, really. I've learned a heck of a lot in the 20 odd minutes that we've been talking. I can see that this is going to be well worth people checking out, and just to see how all the different elements come together in terms of that food and fibre sector as well, because it's important stuff. And as you say, look, things are changing, and the world, I mean, it always has, it's nothing new, right? But it's just, now we're dealing with a digital age that's expanding quite rapidly. So, I'm sure that people will get a heck of a lot out of it. Dr. Ellen Joan Ford, thank you so much for joining us. Really do appreciate it. It's been really good to talk to you.
Yay, thanks so much, Dom, for the opportunity. And yeah, I believe in the stuff, and I hope people get something out of it. It's all about the people.
Next cab off the rank is Josh Williams from Skills, who joins us now on the program. G'day, Josh. How are you?
Hello, Dom. I'm well, and how are you?
I'm not too bad at all. Tell me about Skills, firstly.
Oh, sure. Well, Skills is a pretty major training conglomerate. We run a whole lot of private training establishments in New Zealand, but off to the side, or hopefully in the middle somewhere, is a consultancy. So we do research and insights, organisational development, and my own piece of the world, which is basically vocational education, geeky stuff.
Right. So how did you get involved in this project then?
Dom, I fanboyed my way into this, and that's actually a true story. So I had the Food and Fibre Cove, which is a great organisation, and they'd funded the research and were working with rural leaders, and Chris and Alan had already basically done their first stage, and I read that research report, and I went to one of their people and said, that's fantastic. Like I write research reports, and sometimes you'd like them to be read and not just sit on a dusty shelf. That first stage report they did, which was their research stage, it was like going on a leadership course. At the end, I think they'd come up at that stage with sort of 6 principles of leadership, but just the whole vibe of it and the way they'd approached it. I just went back to Lilla at the Cove and said, wow, this is really cool. And they said, well, it's funny you should say that because their next job is to make a capability framework and they need some help. So I said, count me in. So that was what happened. I started off by being asked to write a kind of boring technical report on how their work might fit in with the NZQA framework. Long story short, it didn't. But from there, and actually it was Chris and Alan who said, well, don't write us a boring report, be one of the co-authors. So that's how it happened. I feel like my name should be in half the font size of the other two.
Well, look, I'm sure you'll played a part in the whole thing coming together, right? Which is the way these things work in a collaborative space like that. So, in terms of the food and fibre aspect of it, though, have you had any background in that at all? Or?
Well, little bits and pieces, like as I say, I mean, as a research organisation, my own background is in the education system, in particular the industry training and apprenticeship system. I was part of the Federation of ITOs for a number of years, and so I've had sort of some long-standing relationships, particularly with how industry training works in the sector. My own background is not a rural one, unless you count, I could see the sheep on the hills in the house I grew up in Wanganui, but no, I was an urban dweller, but my bag's really been adult education, literacy and numeracy, and particularly apprenticeship. So learning on the job, how people go to work and learn every day and, find their pathway and then progress through their careers. That's really been my passion.
Okay, so that skill set and that knowledge base that you've got, how did it fit in with this particular project? What did you bring to the table? What particular role did you play in relation to what we've been speaking about thus far?
Yeah, well, look, and I've got to say that's been a really satisfying process for me because, as I said before, they'd already done the research. Leadership, I think the word we used was it's an ephemeral concept, right? It's complex. It plays out in a number of different ways. It's got a number of aspects to it. And I think what Chris and Alan in particular done a great job of sort of setting all that out. But their deliverable for the Cove, and I think to sort of deliver value for the education system, was how do you turn this into a set of learning outcomes? Because ultimately, one of the things their research said was the sector wants there to be an ecosystem for leadership development. There's lots happening. There's lots of different programs. There's lots of different courses. But people kind of want a sense that there's an overall roadmap, that there's something that sits across the top of that leadership development that makes sure it's best practice, that's supporting people to kind of develop into the right areas, that can support individuals, can support teams, can support organisations. So what I did was I took and sat down with them for a couple of days there in a lovely meeting room there in Fielding. And we basically took a lot of the aspects of their report. They had the principles and they had a whole lot of the hierarchical stuff in the various tables. Thing about a capability framework or any kind of standard setting thing like that is normally you've got an outcome and you've got some progressions. And if you can so basically my role was to unpack what they'd done and then repackage that back up into what looks like a very boring table. But once you've got that very boring table, it's actually a map because, as an individual you can go, oh, where do I think, oh yeah, so leaders do that, do they? Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Or where do I think I am on that sort of scale? And therefore, if I wanted to get from okay to excellent, what might I want to do next? So, as I say, the nice thing was my first job was to basically go and tell them that actually, no, there's nothing in the system right now that fits the bill. But if you build this off the back of your research, then there's something we can definitely move forward with. A kind of final element of that was that in the original phase, again, the report I fanboyed about, a lot of the sector stakeholders that they'd talked to had said they wanted a credential system. So people would like the ability to kind of recognise when people have got these skills and when they've developed these skills.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So what you're referencing there was that capability framework.
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
Section
Okay.
3
Yeah.
for if you're reading the
Section
book.
3. Yes.
Yeah,
Very good.
that was my bit. And as
Okay.
I say, look, all of that really just was taking the wealth of wisdom that, Chris and Alan, I mean, the wisdom and what they brought to it was enormous. But, I think there's about 500 voices worth of people in the report, from the stakeholder and the road shows that they did. And I think, acknowledging positionality is Ngāti Pākehā, but I think the way that they really embraced Te Ao Māori, and this is what made it quite a challenge for an education geek like me. I mean, in vocational education, if we write a standard for banging in nails, we go, you either can or you can't, or you can bang them in straight or you can't. And, it's very easy. You can see it. But we were talking about concepts like wairua and mana and leadership where your values are really aligned with your decision-making. Like how the hell you kind of write that into an old school kind of, competency standard was really, really challenging. But, for me, well worth doing. As I say, in the end, the table's just the table, but what people can then go and do with that is what matters.
Curiosity was listed or is listed as important in leaders. I've always been generally, curious about, bits and pieces that, that pique my interest, I suppose. Is that, it seems to me that's an inherent thing. I may be wrong about that. Can you learn to be more curious? It seems to me it's a sort of a natural thing.
Yeah, I think, it's definitely a mindset. I mean, I think we all meet people who appear to not be curious anymore. I can't relate to that. Very much in the fields where I've worked, lifelong learning. I wish there was a catchier title, but lifelong learning is real, right? And it's one of the things, particularly when you do work in the formal side of the education system. Like, I've been involved with the secondary education system and the tertiary education system and the industry training system and a lot of stuff that kind of leads to NZQA qualifications. And that's all fine, right? And we can go about our lives and maybe get jobs and get better jobs because of that investment we've made in ourselves. But the fact of the matter is, I think we all know that once you're in the workforce, every day you're learning.
Yeah.
When you start that new job, where are the light switches? Where are the bathrooms? How do we do things? How do I turn on my laptop? From the very kind of transactional things around getting around your day through to what you actually do. People talk about, it took me 6 months to get my feet under the desk, and you actually understand even what the job was. Those kinds of things are absolutely normal experiences. And so I think understanding that the workplace is a classroom is a really important mindset shift that I think, our whole education system could kind of benefit from, which kind of brings us back to this and, the things that are happening on farms, or, wherever we are in the value chain in the food and fibre sector, processing or post-harvesting or the land-based stuff or whatever it happens to be. Every day there are individuals that need to be quite self-directed and understand what they're doing and why they're doing it, through to teams and how we operate productively and well. But also that whole sense, I think, of people being treated well and treated fairly. And, again, what I really resonated with the work that Alan and Chris had already done by the time I got there was that whole principles-led or values-led approach to leadership. I thought that was something quite new and quite different.
Yeah, interesting. I did note as well that accountability, a big part of the capability framework as well, or at least a part of it. That's always an important one, isn't it, really? Because, I don't know, that takes a bit of humility, I think, probably, does it not?
Yeah, and I mean, accountability is, again, it's, if you are leading yourself, you're accountable and responsible for what you do, and you take responsibility for doing your job or meeting a deadline, or even taking pride in your work and making sure that what you do is done to a high standard. So there's accountability there. The classic HITS accountability is that, I'm accountable for you for turning up at 11:30, for this recording, or, in that kind of very sort of management transactional sense. But I think it's important to notice that in this framework, accountability is part of service and accountability, and that service aspect of it is equally, if you ask me, more important. That there's a whole lot of literature, etc., around things like servant leadership and humble leadership, or leading from behind, and I think all of that's very real. The hierarchical do this, do that, do this, do that is not necessarily the way that I think a team is really going to operate well together.
That echoes exactly what Chris was talking about earlier, actually.
He's very wise. He's very wise. Hopefully that makes the highlights package. Chris Parsons is one of the wisest people I've met in the last couple of years.
Yeah, well, you're still on his Christmas card list after that, so, good man.
Excellent.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting topic to delve into. So, on the education side of it, effectively, what you're saying is that we need to do better in terms of actually schooling people up, the next generation, in terms of leadership in the food and fibre sector. Is that a fair summation in a nutshell?
In a nutshell, what we've had in the past, I think particularly on the NZQA framework, is stuff about, if you like, management tasks and activities.
Sure.
And that's generally been written up for one industry or another, or for lots of them. And we've written it over and over again, and often they are kind of, if you like, management skills that would be generic. They play out differently in different industries, but it's the same skill, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
But have we had anything around a leadership framework of this nature? No. But I want to say quickly, one of the really encouraging things that happened, and we talk about it in the report, is as we got kind of more advanced, we were talking to a couple of the workforce development councils who themselves were thinking about skills frameworks around leadership. And there was kind of a bit of a review, at least kind of scheduled. So, you'd like to think that, here's one we prepared earlier, that what we've done in terms of this capability framework, with its kind of three main components and its progressions and its learning outcomes, is if someone's out there in the education system right now delivering a course, they can have a look at it and go, oh, yeah, we do that. Oh, how we better build that in, or, are we making sure that we're covering that kind of aspect? And the great news about that, Dom, is we've had emails passed around ourselves that we know that's happening, which is just awesome, right? Any researcher would like their stuff to be read and for people to do something with it. So that's been fantastic to get that kind of feedback already and be on podcasts and that kind of thing.
Yeah, well,
look, I think the future's quite bright, but even if we don't have a formal qualification around this, we've got a tool that organisations and teams and individuals can use to kind of reflect and assess on where they think they are with their own leadership journey and what they want to achieve.
One last thing, the report concludes that leadership involves taking accountability for the behaviours and performance of the team, or having the courage to share responsibility and authority with the team. So we've covered a little bit of that, but just if you were to, in closing this segment, if you like, how do leaders put that into practice, do you think?
Yeah.
I know it's a big one, but
it is a big one. It's a big
important.
one. And look, and it's something that we actually we were challenged with ourselves. Like I say, it's easy to write a standard for can you bang in a nail or not.
Yeah.
Can you lead in manner enhancing ways is much harder to kind of articulate. What do you mean? You've got to exemplify that, or it's very situational. It happens in context. So what I would say is, like a bit like you said before, one of the progressions we tried out earlier was, there's transactional leadership. You do this, you do that. And there's transformational leadership, which is kind of like, hey, I'm trying to uplift you by dint of you doing your role. And then, Chris in particular was talking about true leadership. And I think, for people that have, had leadership roles and, some experiences I could reflect on in my own career, like, you knew when you had it right, when the team was really humming, because actually, the power was shared. It wasn't, I'm the boss and you're doing this. It was actually, the team's really humming because, man, we're so good. We're anticipating each other's needs and we're valuing each other's roles and opinions. And we're all basically driven individually and collectively to do the very best job possible. So, good leaders make that happen through the culture they create and the people they have around them. And there's, all kinds of variables in that. But I think I would fully agree that that's what we were trying to get at here, is that actually the whole kind of leading from the top down is that's a form of leadership. It's a valid form of leadership, but true leadership is something else altogether.
Well said. Very good. Josh Williams, lovely to have you on the program. Really appreciate you taking some time out to have a
Thanks,
chat
Tom.
with us.
Good on you. Thanks a lot.